For today's video, we're going to be talking about decimals. Now, a decimal is another way to write a fraction. For example, the fraction 35 over 100 can be written as a decimal in the form of 0.35. Now, additionally, you can not include the 0 here in front, and you can technically write your decimal as just 0.35. Most times, textbooks and teachers will want you to include that 0 just as a formality. But if you technically don't have to write the 0, you can just write it as 0.35. But one thing to note about decimals is place value. So when I write the very long decimal, and I'm going to start off with 0.12345 6 and so on and so forth. When I look at this decimal 1 2 3 4 5 6, and as it continues on, we need to know about the place value of these values right here. Each of these. 0, since it's in front of the decimal, this represents the ones place. So that's ones. Then the 1 represents tenths. The 2 represents hundredths. The 3 represents thousandths. And then the 4 represents 10,000ths. Now, as you go across, actually, let me rewrite this. This is just 10,000ths. I had tens. 10,000ths. Now, as we continue with 5, 6, and eventually the numbers afterwards, you'll get 100,000ths, and then after that I think it's millions, and then 10 millions, 100 millions. And that pattern repeats. But as long as you realize that the number immediately after the decimal point is the tenths, the next one after is the hundredths, then thousandths, then 10,000ths. That pattern repeats. Notice another thing, that each of these end in THS. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. That's the formality that we use. This 1 right here is a portion of 10. The 2 is a portion of the hundreds. 3 is a portion of the thousands, so on and so forth. Now, that's really what a decimal is and how we understand decimals and but now let's talk about how we work with decimals. And so naturally we'll talk about the 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. And we'll start off by working with addition. So if I have 0.24 and I want to add 0.15, here's what we need to do. We need to write these two numbers, one on top of another, where the decimal point lines up. So I want to make sure that my decimal right here, actually let me do that one more time. I want to make sure that these decimals line up, one on top of another. Okay, so that way I have each of my place values right on top of each other, so that way I can add by the place value. Now this one is kind of simple because both of them end in the hundredths. We have the tenths, and then we have the hundredths. And since both of them are the same, it makes it really simple. We'll see another example right after this where they're not ending in the same place value. But for right now, I'm going to remove my red comments, and I'm going to add these numbers. And so adding decimals is pretty simple in my opinion. We add top to bottom just like we do with regular numbers, and then we'll just carry down the decimal afterwards. So 4 plus 5 is 9. 2 plus 1 is 3. 0 plus 0 is 0. And then we carry the decimal afterwards, and now we are left with 0.39. Okay? That's the answer to this problem. Now let's go ahead and find another problem. My next problem will be, we're going to end with 0.314 plus 0.23. Now, I'm going to write these two numbers top to bottom. So I have 0.314. And then remember that I have to line up the decimal place. So the 0.23 now, I'm going to write it like this. So that way the decimal points in the two numbers are right on top of each other. Now, 0.23, since it's a decimal and it has no thousands place here, I can simply add a 0. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to say that, well, it has 0 of these. However, I need to be able to add 4 to something. So since it has 0 of these, I'm just going to add a 0. And now we can add like we do normally. So 4 plus 0 is 4. 1 plus 3 is 4. 3 plus 2 is 5. 0 plus 0 is 0. And then carrying the decimal. And so my answer in this case is 0.544. Okay. We're going to do one example of subtraction. But subtraction is pretty much the same as what we've done before. Now we just have to keep in mind that the decimals have to be lined up. So we'll do one problem of subtraction. We have 0.593 minus 0.37. Okay. I'm going to write them one on top of another. I'm going to make sure that the decimal point is lined up. And since 37 has no thousands, or 0.37 has no thousands, I'm going to add a 0. I'm going to subtract. And so now let's go ahead and subtract. 3 minus 0 is 3. 9 minus 7 is 2. 5 minus 3 is 2. And 0 minus 0 is 0. Okay. And so we are left with 0.223. All right. So addition and subtraction of decimals is, in my case, in my opinion, is pretty simple. I mean, it's very similar to what you've done before. Now you just have to deal with the decimals. But now let's talk about multiplying decimals. Multiplying decimals is a little bit trickier. We're going to have the example 0.314, a number we used before, times 0.24. Now, when we multiply decimals, we're going to do a couple of things. One, we're going to write them one on top of another. 0.314. and 0.24. This time, I don't need to line up the decimals. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply out like we normally would as if there were no decimals, and then we're going to count the number of decimal places and add that back to our answer. I'll show you in this example. So I'm going to multiply first. I'm going to pretend like these decimal points here don't exist. So think as if they just aren't there. And then I'll add them back afterwards. 4 times 4 is 6. Carry the 1. 4 times 1 is 4. Add the 1, I get 5. 4 times 3 is 12. And 0 I don't need to deal with. Now I'm going to add a 0 since I'm now in the next place over. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. And now, just like regular multiplication, I'm going to add my two numbers together. 6 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 8 is 3. Carry the 1. 2 plus 2 is 4, plus the 1 on top is 5. 1 plus 6 is 7. Okay. Now, this is where the decimal point comes into play. We need to count the spaces of each decimal in our two numbers and then add that to our answer. So what I mean by that is starting on the far right side of 314, I'm going to count how many spaces it takes me to get to my decimal. 1, 2, 3. So that one has 3 spaces. And then for 0.24, I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2. And so that means now I'm going to add these two numbers up. You get 5. And so now I need to move 5 spaces over in my answer. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. I can add a hidden 0 right here in front. That's one thing we can do with decimals that we can't do with whole numbers. And so in this case, my answer then is going to become 0.075336. Now, I like to keep a 0 in front of the decimal point too, so I'm going to add another 0. So I'm going to get 0.07536. And that is my answer for this multiplication problem. Okay. We're going to do one example of dividing, and then we'll get to writing fractions as decimals and writing decimals as fractions. Keep in mind in the next video too, we'll have more examples. So for dividing decimals now, we have 3.56 divided by 0.12. So, to divide decimals, we need to do a couple of things. One, we're going to basically use the division symbol, the division house. I don't remember exactly how you would call it, but I always call it a division house. We're going to write our two numbers inside the division symbol as if they were regular numbers. So I'm going to have 0.12 on the outside. I'm going to have 3.56 on the inside. And then we have to do a couple of things. One, in our outer numbers, 0.12, we can't divide by a decimal amount. So what we've decided to do, and what the mathematicians decided to do, is they want to make this number a whole number. Which means they're secretly going to multiply by a factor of 10 until it gets to be a whole number. What that means is it's going to move this decimal point over 2 spots until they get to be a whole number. Now, whatever we did on this side, we have to do the same thing on this side. And so we're going to we're actually going to move this decimal point over 2 times. And then the final result is that we're going to have a decimal show up right here in our answer. And it's going to go right above where our decimal point ended in 3.56. So it's going to hang out right there in green. After that, we can simply just divide out like we usually do. So in this case, 0.12 becomes 12, and 3.56 is now 356. And so now we have to ask ourselves, how many times does 12 go into 3? It doesn't. How many times does 12 go into 35? It goes in twice. And now I'm going to get 2 times 12 is 24. I'm going to get 11. Going to carry a 6. And so now here, we're going to say how many times does 12 go in, how many times does 12 go into 116? 12 times 9 is 108. 12 times 10 is 120. So I know this is going to be 29. I'm going to get 108 here. Now subtract again, and I'm going to get 16. Now, when we divide decimals, we have to keep going until this number at the very bottom disappears, the 16. So what we can do is we can actually add a hidden 0 here and then bring it down. Whoops, that's right. I'm sorry. That's not 16. How dare I? That is actually 8. Okay, so now I can also bring down a 0, and now I get 80. And then 12 times 6 gets me to 72, and that's why my notes looked a little weird. And then I can subtract 72, and I get 8. Okay, now what we notice here is it actually keeps on, this pattern keeps on going. I'm going to add another 0. I'm going to bring this all the way down. I'm going to get another 80. Now, we don't want to keep repeating this pattern, so what we do instead is we simply put a bar over this 6 to say that it's repeating. And so in this case, my answer for this problem is 29.6 repeating. Okay, and that's division. Now we're going to move on to conversions. So we're going to talk about writing fractions as decimals and then writing decimals as fractions. So let's say I have, and this is a simple example, let's say I have 3/5 and I want to write it as a decimal. Well, what you would do is you would actually just divide it out. You would say, how many times does 5 go into 3? Well, 3, or any whole number for that matter, can be written as 3.0. Okay? We can add the decimal, and then it has no tenths, so we write 0 tenths. That's a trick we're actually going to do here. We're going to change the 3 to be 30, and then we're going to add the decimal up to the top, like we usually do for division. Then we're going to say, how many times does 5 go into 30? Well, it goes in 6 times. And then 5 times 6 is 30. Subtract this out, we get 0. And then our answer appears 0.6. And so 3/5 can be written as 0.6. And that's how you convert decimals to fractions. You simply divide it out. Now, on the other hand, how do we convert a decimal to be a fraction? Let's take another example here. I'm actually going to go down to a new page. we have 0.572, and I want to make this be a fraction. So the way I do this is I count out the number spots. How many place values do we have? We have the tenths, which I'm going to represent by a 10, the hundredths, and actually I'm going to put a THS after each of these, and then the thousandths. Okay. Now this is going to help me because the final place value that I have, which is the thousandths, is now going to become my denominator. I'm going to have 1,000 as my denominator, and 572 is going to go on top. Now, that's how you can convert to a decimal. However, convert from a decimal to a fraction. However, most times we want to simplify this. So we're going to take 572 and we're going to simplify it. 572 over 1,000 and simplify it. Okay. I'm going to cheat here for a moment. So 2 times 286 gets me to 572. So I know 2 times 2 times 143 will get me to 572. And then that means this is going to be 2 times 2 times 250. I'm going to end it there because 143 I think is a prime number if I remember right. Yeah, so the 2's can cancel out. And then I am left with 143 over 250. Okay. Now, 143, does that simplify anymore? I don't think so. That's 4, 3, 7, 8. It's not divisible by 2. It's not divisible by 3. It's not divisible by 6, 5, or 10. I can't factor out a 7 from it. I can't factor out an 8 from it. Can 4 go into it? No. It's not divisible by anything under 10. So I believe that is the answer. So it's 143 over 250. Okay. And that concludes this video. That's how we write decimals into fractions. Okay. You're going to mark out the number of places you have. That final place value will determine your denominator. And then after that, you just have to simplify.